It was just past noon on January 26th, 1966, Australia Day. At Glenelg Beach, the sun beat down on crowds of holidaymakers. 3 siblings, Jane, Arna, and Grant Beaumont, were seen leaving Collie Reserve, their usual playground. Not alone, but with a tall, lean man, a stranger to everyone but seemingly familiar to the children. After that moment, it was as if the trio vanished from the map of Australia. Days later, a single £1 note surfaced at Wenzel's bakery. That detail, so small, so ordinary, would force every theory about their disappearance to be rewritten. But how did it come to this? To understand the shockwaves that rippled through the nation, we have to step back and meet the Beaumont family. The eldest, Jane, was only 9 but already careful and mature, a natural guardian to her siblings. Arna, 7, brought energy and laughter, always in motion, while 4-year-old Grant, the youngest, rarely left his sister's sides. The Beaumonts lived in Somerton Park, a quiet suburb of Adelaide, a place where children ran barefoot to the beach, and parents believed in the innocence of the streets. Back in 1966, Australia still believed in that safety. Kids took buses to the seaside, bought their own snacks, and roamed freely, watched over by the easygoing trust of the era. But the disappearance of the Beaumont children shattered that faith overnight. Suddenly, every parent in the country questioned what they thought they knew about safety and strangers. What really happened that day at Glenelg? Who was the man who gained the trust of 3 children? And why did a humble banknote become the only tangible clue left behind? The search for answers would haunt Australia for decades, and the world would never look at a summer's day at the beach the same way again. Portrait of a family and a vanished era. Before the Beaumont case became the symbol of lost innocence, they were simply a family like any other. Jane, Arna, and Grant Beaumont lived with their parents in Somerton Park, a quiet suburb hugging Adelaide's coastline. Their home, modest but full of warmth, echoed with the laughter and footsteps of 3 growing children. To outsiders, the Beaumonts were ordinary. Yet in that ordinariness lay a deep sense of comfort and trust, typical of mid-century Australia. Jane, the eldest at 9, shouldered responsibility far beyond her years. Thoughtful and mature, she watched over her younger siblings with a protective eye, guiding them through daily routines and little adventures alike. Arna, aged 7, was the heart of the trio, curious, energetic, her spirit infectious. She loved to explore, to ask questions, and to chase after the world with unbridled enthusiasm. 4-year-old Grant, the youngest, idolized his sisters. He clung to them, looking for guidance and reassurance as he navigated the big, often unpredictable world. January 26, 1966, Australia Day, was meant to be another ordinary holiday. For the Beaumont children, Glenelg Beach was a familiar paradise. Sun-soaked sands, rolling surf, the sounds of carnival laughter mingling with the cries of seagulls. Their parents, Jim and Nancy Beaumont, trusted their children to make the short journey on their own, as they had done before. In those days, such independence was not only accepted, but encouraged. Children were taught to be streetwise and resourceful, while the community at large watched out for one another's kids. But that trust, once taken for granted, would not survive what was to come. The disappearance of Jane, Arna, and Grant shook not just the Beaumont family, but the entire fabric of Australian society. In a matter of hours, decades of faith in the safety of public spaces for children began to unravel. The nation awoke to a new reality, one where innocence could vanish in the space between home and the sunlit sand. The Beaumont's tragedy became everyone's warning, and their story an indelible scar on Australia's collective memory. Cracks beneath the surface. Warnings. Ignored, every tragedy leaves behind a trail of overlooked warnings. Small cracks that only become visible in hindsight. In the days and weeks before January 26th, subtle signals began to emerge around Glenelg Beach. But in a society built on trust, such hints went largely unnoticed. On that fateful morning, witnesses described seeing the Beaumont children in the company of a tall, thin man with short blonde hair and sun-darkened skin. He was a stranger to the community, yet he seemed at ease with the children, even familiar. Multiple people, from bus drivers to beachgoers, later reported spotting this same figure interacting warmly with Jane, Arna, and Grant near Collie Reserve and along Mosley Street. Some recalled him playing games with the children on the grass, an image so ordinary that it raised no alarm at the time. But something else stood out: the bakery transaction. Staff at Wenzel's Bakery recorded a purchase made by the children, a collection of pastries, pies, and cold meats, paid for with a crisp £1 note. It was a detail that would seem trivial, except for one thing. The Beaumont parents were adamant that the children had left home with only coins, not notes. The implication was chilling. Someone, presumably the man seen with them, had provided the extra money, suggesting he'd spent enough time with the children to gain both their trust and their company. Was this a calculated act, or simply a benevolent gesture misunderstood in hindsight? If the children were in distress, why did no one notice? The questions gnawed at investigators. The easy camaraderie between the children and the man became, in retrospect, the most disturbing clue of all. For if danger could hide behind a friendly face and ordinary acts, how could any parent ever truly protect their children? At the time, these red flags were brushed aside as the harmless interactions of a summer day. But after the disappearance, every detail became a piece of a larger, more sinister puzzle, one that would torment the Beaumont family, the police, and an entire nation for decades to come. The day everything changed. A timeline unravels. January 26, 1966. It began as a day like any other, bathed in the relentless sunlight of an Australian summer. By noon, Jane, Arna, and Grant Beaumont had left their home, heading for the familiar freedom of Glenelg Beach. This was a routine outing, nothing out of the ordinary in a world that still believed in the kindness of strangers. The children arrived at Glenelg, weaving through the crowds, laughter and excitement marking every step. Witnesses placed them at Collie Reserve, a patch of green close to the sand and sea. They were seen playing, sometimes alone, sometimes with the tall, blonde man who seemed to have slipped so easily into their company. Time passed, and around midday, the children made their way to Wenzel's Bakery. The staff there would later remember the transaction in vivid detail. A £1 note was handed over, goods exchanged, meat pies, pastries, snacks. It didn't match the coins their parents had given them that morning. And so, almost imperceptibly, the mystery deepened. After leaving the bakery, the siblings were sighted near the beach, then the playground, always with the same man close by. No one reported distress. Nothing seemed amiss. But as the afternoon waned and the children failed to return home, a quiet dread began to settle over Somerton Park. Their parents waited, then worried, then panicked. By evening, the police were notified. The response was immediate and sweeping. Officers scoured Glenelg and the surrounding neighborhoods, questioning witnesses, combing the beaches and parks. Word spread quickly. Within hours, the story dominated headlines, and the tight-knit community mobilized in a desperate search. 3 days later, authorities drained the Potawalonga boat haven, hoping for answers beneath the water's surface, but found nothing. Each moment of that day, every sighting and conversation, was recorded and re-examined, transforming a simple timeline into a complex web of clues. But even as the hours stretched into days, then years, the trail grew cold. The Beaumont children had disappeared without a trace, and the question remained: how could 3 children vanish so completely in broad daylight, with so many watching, and not a single person able to say what happened next? The investigation begins, chasing shadows and hopes. As the initial shock wore off, the investigation into the Beaumont children's disappearance grew urgent and desperate. In the days following January 26, 1966, the South Australian police cast a wide net across Glenelg and beyond. Detectives worked around the clock, retracing every step the siblings had taken, interviewing witnesses, and scouring for any physical clue that could break the case wide open. Eyewitness testimony became the cornerstone of the early investigation. Accounts from beachgoers and shopkeepers painted a consistent portrait. The same tall, tanned, blonde-haired man seen with the children near Collie Reserve, then again at the bakery, and later near the water. Yet, for all the detail about his appearance, there was one glaring omission. No one could recall a vehicle or a license plate. It was as if the man had simply materialized and then faded away. Forensics, by today's standards, were painfully limited. This was an era before security cameras, before DNA testing, before the technology that would one day revolutionize criminal investigations. Officers relied on methodical searches and gut instinct. They combed through sand dunes, emptied the Potawalonga boat haven, and followed up on every possible lead. But time and again, they ran into dead ends. No bodies, no concrete evidence, just the echo of lost voices and a lingering sense of dread. Rumors quickly filled the void. In November 1966, famed Dutch psychic Gerard Croiset was flown in, declaring the children's remains lay beneath concrete. The police dug, finding nothing. Letters arrived over the years, some cruel hoaxes, raising and dashing hopes. In 1992, fingerprint analysis revealed one set of confession letters was nothing more than a troubled teenager's prank. Decades later, new technology allowed for ground-penetrating radar surveys and fresh excavations in areas tied to persons of interest, each search turning up only disappointment and animal bones. Through it all, the family clung to hope, and the police never closed the file. Yet, with every year, the Beaumont mystery grew colder, a chilling reminder of how fragile the boundary is between ordinary life and the unknown. Twists, false leads, and the elusive truth. In any enduring mystery, there are moments when the investigation pivots, when a single piece of evidence or a sudden revelation seems to promise answers, only to leave investigators grasping at shadows. In the case of the Beaumont children, these moments were as cruel as they were captivating. One such turning point was the discovery of the £1 note at Wenzel's bakery. At first glance, it was a minor detail, but for detectives, it changed everything. The presence of a banknote, when the children had only been given coins, transformed the case from a story of children lost during an innocent day at the beach to something darker. The involvement of an adult, someone who had the means and intent to earn the children's trust and perhaps orchestrate their disappearance. That single banknote forced authorities and the public alike to reconsider every prior assumption. But hope in this case was a double-edged sword. Over the years, the investigation was repeatedly jolted by false leads and cruel hoaxes. In 1992, police unmasked one infamous string of confession letters as a teenage prank, extinguishing a glimmer of hope that had tormented the Beaumont family for decades. Each time a new clue surfaced, each time concrete was dug up or radar equipment was deployed, the promise of closure loomed, only to dissolve into disappointment. Large-scale excavations at the Castalloy factory site in 2013, and again in 2018 and 2025, brought renewed media attention and community anxiety. Rumors swirled about persons of interest: businessman Harry Phipps, convicted offender Bevan Spencer von Einem, and others. But none could be conclusively linked to the disappearance. The only discoveries, animal bones and debris, each one a bitter reminder of hope's cost. Every twist in the Beaumont case served to highlight the fragility of evidence and the agony of uncertainty. For investigators, these false dawns were humbling. For the Beaumont family, they were heartbreak revisited. And for Australia, they were a lesson that the truth, no matter how fiercely pursued, can remain stubbornly out of reach. Persons of interest, suspects and shadows. Decades have passed, and the Beaumont case remains Australia's most haunting, unsolved mystery. In all that time, not a single person has been charged, no one brought to trial. Yet over the years, investigators have repeatedly returned to a small handful of persons of interest, each shadowed by suspicion, each ultimately left beyond the reach of proof. Harry Phipps, a well-known businessman with ties to the Castalloy factory, was one of the earliest names whispered by investigators. Reports surfaced that he fit the physical description given by witnesses, and that on the very day of the children's disappearance, a young boy had allegedly seen him digging a hole on the factory grounds. Years later, that site was excavated, not once but several times. Each time, no evidence of the Beaumont children was found. Phipps passed away in 2004, taking his secrets, if he had any, to the grave. Other names surfaced as well. Bevan Spencer von Einem, a convicted murderer serving a life sentence for unrelated crimes, became a figure of intense speculation. Yet, for all the rumors and indirect statements, there was no evidence to connect him directly to the Beaumont case. Likewise, James Ryan O'Neill and Anthony Allen Monroe, both convicted of grave offenses, were investigated and scrutinized. Yet nothing ever tied them to Glenelg on that fateful day. The lack of resolution became a wound that refused to heal, both for the investigators who spent years chasing leads and for a nation that yearned for justice. The South Australia Police kept the file open, still welcoming tips and testimony from the public. But as the decades slipped by, hope flickered and faded. Witnesses aged, suspects died, and memories blurred. Yet the specter of the Beaumont case lingered. Every few years, new breakthroughs would seize headlines, each time the same result: frustration, heartbreak, and more questions than answers. The shadow cast by the mystery grew only longer, refusing to release its grip on those left behind. Aftermath and legacy, a nation forever changed. The Beaumont children's disappearance was more than a crime. It was a fracture in the heart of Australia. In the years and decades that followed, the case became a haunting symbol, a cautionary tale, and a catalyst for profound change. For the Beaumont family, the pain was relentless. Nancy and Jim Beaumont spent the rest of their lives searching for answers, clinging to any thread of hope, yet never finding peace. Every letter, every rumor, every excavation reopened the wound. Nancy passed away in September 2019, at the age of 92, and Jim followed in April 2023 at 97. Neither lived to see the mystery solved, nor to lay their children to rest. Their story is a silent testimony to the enduring agony of unanswered questions, a grief that outlasts even time itself. But the impact reached far beyond one family. The disappearance marked the end of an era in Australia, shattering the illusion that children could roam free and safe. Almost overnight, the nation's attitude shifted. Parents became more vigilant. Laws and customs around child safety changed. Schools and communities introduced new rules and protocols. The media became more cautious, and the public more suspicious of strangers. In a sense, Australia lost its innocence on that summer day at Glenelg, replaced by a permanent undercurrent of caution. Even now, the case is not forgotten. A reward, up to $1 million Australian dollars, still stands for any information that could lead to a resolution. Police files remain open. Tips are still welcomed, and private groups continue the search. Yet the years keep passing, and the trail grows colder. The Beaumont case remains an unsolved mystery, a story unfinished, an ache in the national conscience. It serves as a stark reminder. In the pursuit of truth, independent evidence is king, and hope must never outpace the facts. Until a new clue emerges, the £1 note at Glenelg will stand as a silent witness to the day innocence disappeared, and with it, a piece of Australia's soul. The disappearance of Jane, Arna, and Grant Beaumont on January 26, 1966, forever changed Australia. What began as an ordinary trip to Glenelg Beach turned into the nation's most heartbreaking mystery, one that shattered trust, rewrote the rules of child safety, and left a legacy of unanswered questions. Decades later, despite exhaustive searches, countless leads, and a $1 million reward, the case remains unsolved. The Beaumont family's pain is a solemn reminder of how a single day can alter a country's sense of security. If this story moved you, help keep the memory of the Beaumont children alive. Like, share, and follow our channel to explore more of history's most mysterious true crime cases. Together, let's honor the victims, support ongoing investigations, and ensure that their stories and the lessons they teach are never forgotten.